Hello everyone. Today we're going to be discussing the next question for an interview that generally comes up quite often, and it's quite an interesting but difficult question to answer if you're not quite prepared for it. So, what are your strengths and weaknesses? So, we're going to split this up into two and talk about what are your weaknesses first and strengths next, because normally weaknesses are the main pitfall and have lots of easy mistakes that you can make. Since it's quite common, it's also a question that interviewers know what most of the answers are, and those cliche answers are so obvious and those are so etched in their brain, you don't want to be going into that path and actually just falling into the path of just losing the opportunity to showcase your weaknesses and obviously the main thing, your strengths, in a way that it helps the interview rather than hinders it. So, what are your weaknesses? This question, don't answer any weaknesses that actually relate to the job and would impact your job negatively, or even has potential to impact your job negatively. So, for example, do not say that you have time management issues, you have huge time management issues, or you have a temper, or you can't tolerate other people's mistakes. Even though the last one may sound like you're a perfectionist, you don't want to be sounding like you can't be a team player and can't work together well with other people. You've got to show your weakness to be something where it can't be a cliche. So don't go down the path of saying you're a perfectionist or you work too hard. You can use these examples, but try and elaborate and make sure your answers are catered to you personally. And even though these cliche answers may be true to you, your nature, try and avoid them. Try and make sure that the weaknesses that you're saying are unrelated to job, as I've said before. So, for example, you're over trusting. You try and say that an example would be you're over trusting of others, and this has meant that you've previously taken someone's word taken a colleague's word, and rather than taking a colleague's word and actually just gone through with a job and actually, or not even a job or any situation, and not actually done it, just assume that they were correct rather than actually checking. So just try and actually then, since you've addressed your weakness, try and just give an explanation of what you've done previously to overcome that weakness. So, for example, what if you've been over trusting someone, now you just, even though you still have a good trust between your colleagues in previous jobs or previous relations in school, college, etc., try and actually say that now you just have a quick fact check, or make sure that you quickly check what you've been told by a client or a colleague. Next, make sure that this weakness also is a weakness. Don't, as I said before, don't go for the obvious of, oh, I'm a perfectionist, and then just expect them to believe, oh, that's your weakness, and you're not actually addressing the question. So don't be too over specific on all your weaknesses and basically limit the chances of you getting that job or opportunity. And don't be the other side as well, where you believe you're too good, and actually you show your human error and actually show that you have the ability to learn. try and actually make your weakness into a strength, but also answer the question. Because most interviewers will immediately know if you just give them weakness and just overwhelmingly show that how you've fixed your weakness, and now they may have follow-up saying that, well, you've overcome that weakness, so what's your current weakness? Make sure you answer the question. And also, try and, if you're listing out multiple weaknesses, make sure, again, I'm going to reiterate this point. Give a weakness which is somewhat unrelated to the job. You do not want your profile to be hurt based on this question. You want to be showing that your weaknesses are essentially unrelated to the job role and what's required of you to complete that task or complete your job to a high standard. That's how you should generally answer this question, and make sure with every single question that we cover here that you've got to be making it personal to you. It doesn't make you impersonable if you're listing a generic weakness. You've got to make sure that it's something that actually has happened. Even if it's a small weakness and you just say it and actually portray it as your main weakness, you've got to actually have to have some experiences of it. And you've got to make sure that you can show that you're capable of fixing it it could be through a training, or you have a backup plan to your weakness. So this is quite a irrelevant one to the job at hand, but it could be actually quite good, especially since you don't want to be highlighting your job weaknesses. So you could say that you don't exercise much, even though this is a health negative and could impact your job in the future. You can say, I don't exercise much at the moment, but I've started going to the gym recently or started running, but I don't do it enough. This is an unrelated weakness, but a weakness nonetheless, and you're answering the question. You don't want to be just listing a non-weakness, such as perfectionism, or the other side where you're listing a weakness which really harms your job opportunity. Now we're going to move on to what are your strengths. Remember, this will push the chances of you getting that job much higher than the weakness question. The weakness is essentially a pitfall. If you answer it incorrectly, there's a good chance that you're not going to get that job, because that's something that's going to stick out quite easily. But a strength, this is what gives you an edge over the rest of the candidates. So first, start off by just quickly reviewing your achievements and main achievements rather than just listing through all of them. Just go through your main achievements and talk about what's most important to you. Don't go and talk about something that, one, is unrelated to the job at hand, even though it may be your best achievement. Go to the acknowledged achievement which relates to the job the most, and actually it's one of the better achievements you have. So an achievement could be, let's say this job requires a lot of IT skills. You could say one of your achievements was that one of the strengths you had was that you were able to complete a project through using an IT feature such as Excel, as I've previously mentioned in the previous podcast, that you can show that you've used your skills in Excel or whatever other um, product or skill that you're trying to show that the job requires. So through using that IT or whatever, you've been able to finish that task or shown that that's your strength, which the job clearly requires. Then make sure that you're giving examples. Don't just list off strengths. So a great strength that most jobs require are great communication skills. Don't just list off, oh, I have great communication skills. And you've got to be able to make sure that you back it up with an example. Every skill you give, every strength you give, try and make sure you're backing up with an example. So, for example, communication skills. You can specify through written communication, verbal communication. So let's say you've written essays at high school, or you've done a project which require you to summarize your findings. Make sure that you highlight that you've done this to a high level. So let's say you wrote an essay where you got a distinction or a extremely high grade. Highlight this when you're giving your strength. Don't just leave your interviewers to think, well, they're just listing off the obvious answers that you can find online. Then a few other examples of great strengths are honesty, technical ability. If you're flexible, you're curious, you're problem solving, you have good problem solving skills and analyzing skills. Your subject knowledge is extremely high. You can continuously improve on the work you've done. Make sure that you're backing all of these with examples. So for example, some people are good at essay writing, some people are good at mathematical skills. You've got to be able to, even if you don't have a example that can completely and has a straightforward relation, but try and make sure you do. But if you don't, let's say you're good at mathematics, you can, and you've been in a mathematic competition, like previously in a maths challenge or any other maths capabilities, or you're essentially just good at maths, and you have some examples that you've done of the questions that you've done before where you didn't just use simple maths to do. No, not as simple, but you used knowledge where you couldn't actually see, or someone else or you couldn't see previously. You just have the ability to problem solve, and you would start off by saying, oh, I'm a good problem solver, and that's shown in my high maths abilities, which is as is shown by my result in maths at A-level, GCSE or uni, whatever. Make sure you're relating it to you're giving examples, and you're actually making a coherent point. A main pitfall in this question is try and branch out to a few strengths, highlight as many strengths as possible, but don't go on and list all the strengths that you can think of or you've looked up and prepared for this question previously. Highlight a select few strengths that you have and talk about them all in quite a high level. So don't basically a relatively decent level. Don't go and overdo each strength. So don't go on one strength and just say, let's go back to communication skills. If you're a great communicator and you just show example on example of your great communication skills, you're basically highlighting to the interviewer that your other strengths aren't really that good enough. So your technical knowledge, you've got to make sure that you're all-rounder in the job roles and the job requirements. So make sure you look at the job requirements carefully and highlight your strengths to those to the job and the responsibilities there. So make sure you don't overdo your strengths in terms of number of strengths or the depth in which you talk about your strengths. You've got to make sure you're a team player. You've got to make sure you're basically most of the skills the interviewer is looking for. But okay, so let's just go back through this, and I'll quickly give you a summary of what we've talked about today. So when you're talking about weaknesses, make sure you're talking about an unrelated topic rather than just going on and on about something that could actually hurt your chances of getting this job. Make sure you also give an example, and these examples should generally be, never go for the cliche answers, and don't go for answers where you just keep on going and actually give an indication to the interviewer that even though that specific weakness is unrelated, they can think of reasons why that, since you've now gone and overdone it, they'll think that your weaknesses are now related, since now you just talk about, you've now actually made sure that the interviewer sees that weakness and has now actually found a way to relate it to the job. So try and make sure that you don't emphasize any of your weaknesses too much. Answer the question. This is quite important. Don't make sure that even if you're listing a few weaknesses, or even, well, let's say 1 or 2, you're making sure that this is a weakness that you can fix or you fixed previously. But make sure that this is a weakness. It's not a strength. It's not just a strength which you've just worded as weakness. Even though that's good to do, you've got to make sure that the interview doesn't see that straight away. So, for example, you've got to make sure that you don't give a weakness and say, now you completely solved it. That's a different question. That's a question, how have you overcome a problem? That's where you answer it. You've got to make sure that you have a weakness and you can see the ways you can solve it, and you've begun to solve it. Not always go for the answer where you're basically completely or hidden your weakness. Your weaknesses need to be hidden where you're not actually giving weaknesses which can impact that job. And remember, I'm going to say that I've said this quite a few times, but don't go for the overdone, I'm a perfectionist, I'm so hardworking that the job that I only focus, that the interviewer will think that you only focus on one specific thing and cannot manage your time properly. Now, moving on to the review of strengths. Review your achievements, then highlight the achievements that you think are the most important to that job and what you've done so far. Make sure you're pushing. This is also a great opportunity to push this interview in the direction that you want it to go in. So try and actually hint achievements or strengths that relate to the job completely, and experiences that you've had which are examples of this strength, which you can actually lead into. So make sure you know your examples really well, so you can elaborate on them if they have any follow-up questions. So as I said, you can basically lead your interviewer to go into a certain way. So let's say this job requires you to be able to work long periods of hours, or actually it requires you to be flexible with your hours. So give them examples of where you've been previously flexible with your time, or your flexibility in other ways. So the job you've done, so how you've been flexible in managing different roles. So give those examples and talk about these examples where they can ask you a question and you can just keep answering and move down a path where you're happy to talk about and you've worked on when you've prepared for this interview. Make sure you've you've got to make sure that you're relating every single strength to the job. This is completely flipped around to the weaknesses, where you want to make sure it's unrelated to the job at hand, but you want to make sure your strengths are related and the interviewer can clearly see you as a great fit for this job. And remember, it has to be relevant. Don't go on saying some great skill that you've done outside the job. So let's say sport, extracurriculars that has nothing to do with the job. Make sure it's something relevant. And make sure you're showing many strengths which the job requires. So don't just focus on one. Even though it could be a main one that you have, you've got to be showing to the interviewer that you are, let's say, a team player, have great communication skills, you're honest, you're a great problem solver. You've got to be able to highlight to the interviewer that you can do all these things to an extremely high standard, and that's what will take you and give you an edge over the rest of the interviewees. And thank you for listening to the second episode. Sorry about the abrupt finish to the last episode. I've just started this off, so please give me some feedback and thank you for listening.